Vacations are supposed to be a break. I desperately needed one. Life had been a punch to the gut lately, with the divorce papers still unsigned on my kitchen counter and the company restructuring that left me clinging to my job by my fingernails. I figured I'd hit Hawaii, sun, sand, and no emails. Just me trying to piece myself back together on some distant shore where nobody knew my name. Finding the right Airbnb was a task in itself. Most places were either overpriced tourist traps or downright depressing shacks masquerading as rustic retreats. Then I found it. A 2-bedroom, 2-bath beachfront house for a steal, only $100 a night. The listing had professional photos showing hardwood floors, an open-concept living room, and windows that promised endless ocean views. The reviews were sparse but positive, though none were recent. Too good to pass up, I thought. Maybe the universe finally threw me a bone. The booking process was oddly quick, with no back and forth with the host, just an immediate confirmation and a set of check-in instructions. I should have known then that something was off, but desperation has a way of dulling your instincts. I caught my flight out of O'Hare on a Wednesday morning. The plane ride was endless, with crying babies, a guy who wouldn't stop coughing, and turbulence that had me white-knuckling the armrest. By the time we touched down in paradise, I was running on empty, powered by nothing but airport coffee and the promise of peace and quiet. The rental car place gave me a beaten-up Civic that had seen better days. The air conditioning wheezed more than it cooled, and something in the engine made an unsettling clicking sound, but it moved, and that was enough. The drive to the Airbnb started normally enough. Typical tourist stuff. Beaches, palm trees, and sunburned visitors taking selfies. But as I followed the GPS deeper into the island, things changed. The roads narrowed, the pavement giving way to gravel in places. The tropical vegetation grew denser, creating a green tunnel that seemed to swallow my car. The GPS signal flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought I'd lost it completely, but then it came back, the robotic voice guiding me down a winding path that didn't look like it had seen maintenance in years. "You have arrived at your destination," the GPS announced, and I killed the engine. The house stood before me, and something in my gut twisted. Don't get me wrong, it looked exactly like the photos. A quaint beach house with weathered blue siding, white trim, and a wraparound porch that probably offered amazing sunset views. But something felt off. The windows seemed to stare back at me like eyes watching my every move. The wind rustled through the surrounding palms, creating whispers that sounded almost like words. I grabbed my bags from the trunk, trying to shake off the creeping unease. The key was supposed to be under a potted plant by the door, one of those fake rocks that fool exactly nobody. I found it easily enough, though the rock felt oddly warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been, even in the Hawaiian sun. The lock turned with a click that echoed in the strange silence, no birds singing. Aren't tropical islands supposed to be full of bird calls? The door swung open with a creak that belonged in a horror movie, revealing a dim interior that smelled of sea salt and something else, something older and mustier that I couldn't quite place. I fumbled for the light switch, and yellowed bulbs flickered to life, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I dumped my bag in what looked like the master bedroom and en sleeping bathroom and those promised ocean views through windows that needed a good cleaning. The bed sheets were crisp and clean, hospital corner tight, but something about their pristine whiteness felt wrong in this otherwise lived-in space. Exhausted from the journey, I decided to do a quick walkthrough before unpacking. The house was cozy enough, with a fireplace I'd seen in the photos, which did seem oddly out of place in Hawaii. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a cooking show, and a dining room with a table set for 6, though I couldn't imagine 6 people fitting comfortably in this space. My throat was dry from the travel, so I headed to the kitchen for water. The fridge hummed quietly. Too quietly, really, like it was trying not to draw attention to itself. When I opened it, the light inside flickered twice before settling into a steady glow. It was mostly empty, save for some condiments and a bottled white wine with no label. That's when I saw it. An envelope, yellowed with age, taped to the inside of the door. My name, Steve, was written on it in elegant cursive, the kind they don't teach in schools anymore. I stared at it for a long moment, my hand hovering near but not quite touching it. In my line of work, in insurance adjustment, unexpected letters usually mean bad news. But this was a vacation. This was supposed to be my escape. Finally, curiosity won out. I peeled the envelope from the door, noting how the paper felt wrong somehow, too thick, almost leathery. Inside was a folded piece of paper that looked newer than the envelope, though not by much. The paper crackled as I unfolded it, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet house. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, precise, almost mechanical in its perfection. "Hello, Steve," the letter began. "How long had this envelope been waiting for me?" The letter continued, "Thank you for choosing to stay at this Airbnb for the week. I hope your stay is a good one. But first, you must read the rules." Rule 1. We do not have a maid. If a tall woman in a maroon dress knocks on the front door claiming to be the maid, do not open the door. If the woman returns the next day, hide, preferably in a room with a lock. Rule 2. Never leave open food in the fridge for more than 2 days. Rule 3. If you wake up in the middle of the night and see a man in your kitchen, don't freak out. He will be gone by morning. Rule 4. Don't go outside after the sun goes down. Rule 5. If you see a little kid in the pool, call the number on the fridge and inform them. They will send someone to handle it. Rule 6. If you walk up the stairs and see a little girl holding a teddy bear, go into the first door on your left, grab a toy from the box, place it in front of the girl, then go downstairs for 15 minutes. It will be safe afterward. Rule 6 continued. If the girl doesn't leave, run. Rule 7. Never go into the attic even if you hear noises. The note ended with that neat signature, "Sincerely, the owner." I read it 3 times, my heart rate picking up with each pass. This had to be a joke, right? Some local's idea of messing with tourists, or maybe the owner's quirky way of making stays memorable. But if it was meant to be funny, the punchline was lost on me. I could feel the regret settling in my stomach like a lead weight. The rational part of my brain, the part that dealt with insurance claims and mortgage payments, tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a liability thing, some weird way of warning about local wildlife or trespassers, but another part of my brain, a more primitive part, that remembered being afraid of the dark, whispered that something else was going on here. I pulled out my phone to call the owner, to demand an explanation, or maybe just cancel my stay altogether. No signal, of course. I moved around the house, holding my phone up like some kind of divining rod, searching for even one bar of reception. Nothing. Just then, the doorbell rang. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house, making me jump so hard I dropped my phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor, the screen lighting up with the "no service" message that seemed to mock me now. Another ring, more insistent this time. I approached the front door cautiously, my feet silent on the old floorboards, which was strange because they'd creaked under my weight earlier. The peephole was one of those old-fashioned brass ones, the kind that distorts everything into a fishy view of reality. Through it, I saw her, a tall woman in a maroon dress, exactly as the rules had described. Her face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat that looked like something from another era. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her, waiting. Then she knocked again, 3 sharp raps that seemed to reverberate through my bones. "Hello, sir," she called out, her voice pleasant and professional, like a flight attendant. "I'm the maid. I'm here to clean the house." Rule number 1 echoed in my mind. Do not open the door. "There must be some mistake," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wasn't told about any maid service." She didn't respond immediately, the silence stretching out, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the distant crash of waves that suddenly seemed very far away. "Sir," she said finally, her voice different now, lower, rougher, like something trying to remember how to sound human. "I need to clean the house. It needs cleaning. Let me in." The knocking resumed, but it wasn't the polite tapping from before. This was a pounding, relentless and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The door shuddered in its frame with each impact, and I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the rug. I fell hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. The pounding continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I lay there on the floor, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no waves, not even the hum of the refrigerator, just nothing. After what felt like an eternity, I gathered the courage to look through the peephole again. The porch was empty. I spent the next hour pacing the house, double-checking every lock and window. My phone still showed no signal, and the house's Wi-Fi password from the welcome packet connected to nothing. I was effectively cut off from the outside world, trapped in this house with its strange rules and whatever had just pretended to be a maid. The logical thing would have been to leave, to get in that beat-up Civic and drive until I found civilization again, but something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe curiosity, or maybe something else, something that had been waiting for me since I first saw that too good to be true listing. By late afternoon, the humidity had become unbearable. The house's air conditioning worked, but barely, pushing around warm air that seemed to stick to my skin. A swim started to sound good, too good to resist, despite everything that had happened. The pool I'd seen from my bedroom window beckoned, promising relief from both the heat and my growing anxiety. I changed into swim trunks, grabbed a towel from the bathroom, noticing how it smelled faintly of mothballs, and headed out back. The pool was smaller than it had looked from above, kidney-shaped and surrounded by concrete that had seen better days. The water was clear, though, invitingly blue in the late afternoon sun. I dipped a toe in, perfect temperature. Before long, I was swimming laps, trying to wash away the memory of the woman in the maroon dress. The water felt good, normal, and, for a few minutes, I could almost pretend this was just a regular vacation. That's when I saw him. He appeared without sound or warning, a little boy, maybe 7 or 8, sitting cross-legged at the edge of the pool. He wore red swim trunks and nothing else, his pale skin almost translucent in the sunlight. But it was his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. They were vacant, unfocused, like dusty marbles set into a doll's face. He stared at me, or through me, his head tilted at an angle that looked wrong on a human neck. I froze in the water, my feet finding the bottom of the pool. Rule number 5 screamed in my head: if you see a little kid in the pool, call the number on the fridge. The boy's head tilted further than it should have been able to go, until his ear nearly touched his shoulder. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I bolted from the pool, water cascading off me as I ran for the house. I didn't bother with the towel, leaving wet footprints across the hardwood as I sprinted to the kitchen. The phone number was there on a yellow sticky note, the ink slightly faded but still legible. My hands shook as I dialed on the landline phone, wondering if it would even work. It did, connecting on the first ring. "Hello." The voice was crisp, professional, as if they'd been waiting for my call. Yeah, hi," I stammered. "My name is Steve. I'm at an Airbnb and there's a kid by the pool." The silence that followed felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken knowledge. Then the voice returned, calm but commanding. Listen carefully. Lock all the doors and windows. Do not, under any circumstances, look outside. Someone will be there shortly." Click. The line went dead. I ran through the house, checking every lock, drawing every curtain as I passed the windows facing the pool. I fought the urge to look outside, but human nature is a powerful thing, and at the last window I couldn't help myself. I lifted the corner of the curtain just slightly. The boy was still there, but he'd moved. He now stood at the edge of the pool, his back to the house. Water dripped from his body, forming a perfect circle around his feet, despite the fact that he hadn't been in the pool. As if sensing my gaze, he began to turn. I dropped the curtain and backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The doorbell rang, and for a moment, panic seized me. Had the woman in maroon returned? But when I checked the peephole, I saw 2 men in black suits, their faces expressionless. They didn't wait for me to open the door. Instead, they produced a key and let themselves in. They moved with practiced efficiency, not speaking a word to me. One headed straight for the backyard, while the other stood guard at the door. I caught glimpses of equipment in their hands, things that looked military but somehow wrong, like technology from another time or place. I sat on the couch, my wet swim trunks soaking into the fabric, listening to sounds I couldn't identify coming from the backyard. Once, I heard what might have been a child's laugh, but it was cut off abruptly, replaced by a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. 2 hours passed before they returned inside. The one who had gone to the pool looked different somehow. His suit was dry but wrinkled in impossible ways, and a thin trickle of what looked like blood ran from his nose. "It's safe now," he said, his voice flat and mechanical. Without another word, they left, the door clicking shut behind them. I waited until their car pulled away before looking out the window. The pool was still there, still blue, still inviting, but the water was completely still, unnaturally so, as if it had been frozen solid despite the Hawaiian heat. After the pool incident, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. Every creak, every shadow, every reflection in the windows seemed loaded with meaning. The sun was starting to set, painting the walls in shades of orange and red that looked uncomfortably like dried blood. I needed to eat something, but the thought of cooking made my stomach turn. I hadn't brought any food in with me, and after the rules about the fridge, I wasn't sure I wanted to. Still, I had to check what supplies were available. Opening the kitchen cabinets revealed a strange assortment of items, canned goods with labels so faded I couldn't read them, boxes of crackers that looked new but had expiration dates from 3 years ago, and a single box of cereal that rattled in a way cereal shouldn't. I closed the cabinets and decided hunger was better than whatever was in there. The sun had almost set now, and rule number 4 echoed in my head: don't go outside after dark. Through the kitchen window, I could see the last rays of sunlight disappearing behind the trees. The darkness that followed seemed thicker than normal, almost liquid in its density. My phone still showed no signal, but the screen displayed 8:47 p.m. hours to go before morning. I decided to distract myself with TV, but when I turned it on, all channels showed static except one. A local station playing what looked like old cartoons, but something was off about them. The characters' movements were too jerky, their voices pitched slightly wrong, and their eyes seemed to follow me around the room. I switched it off quickly. The house settled into night sounds, the typical creaks and groans of an old building, but also other noises I couldn't quite identify. Something that might have been footsteps in the attic, a sound like fingernails on glass from somewhere upstairs, and occasionally, very faintly, what sounded like a child's laughter. I checked my watch. 9:23 p.m. The digital display flickered for a moment, showing what looked like strange symbols before returning to normal numbers. I decided to try sleeping. At least unconsciousness would make the time pass faster. Sleep didn't come easily. The bed was comfortable enough, but every time I started to drift off, some new sound would jerk me back to awareness. The waves crashing outside should have been soothing, but their rhythm seemed wrong, as if they were hitting the shore in Morse code. When I finally did fall asleep, it was the kind of shallow, uneasy rest that leaves you more tired than before. I dreamed of the boy from the pool, but in the dream his head kept turning, until it had spun completely around, multiple times like a grotesque corkscrew. I jolted awake at exactly 3:33 a.m., the numbers glowing an angry red on the bedside clock. Something had woken me, some noise from downstairs. I lay there in the darkness, listening to my own heartbeat, when I heard it, the distinct sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. Rule number 3 echoed in my mind. If you wake up in the middle of the night and see a man in your kitchen, don't freak out. He will be gone by morning. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, to pull the covers over my head like a child and wait for dawn. But I had to know, had to see. I crept to the bedroom door, wincing at every tiny creak of the floorboards. The hallway was dark, but a faint light spilled up the stairs from the kitchen. Not electric light, but something softer, more organic, like bioluminescence. Step by careful step, I made my way down the stairs, clinging to the wall to avoid the worst of the creaks. The glow got stronger as I approached the kitchen, casting everything in a pale, sickly blue. And there he was, standing at the counter, his back to me. Dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned suit, he was tall, too tall, his head nearly brushing the ceiling and unnaturally thin. His movements were wrong, jerky, like a marionette, as he appeared to be preparing something on the counter. "Don't freak out. He'll be gone by morning." I started to back away slowly, but I must have made some small noise because he stopped moving, just stopped, completely still, like a photograph. Then, very slowly, his head began to turn. I ran back up the stairs, taking them two at a time, not caring about the noise now. I slammed the bedroom door and dove under the covers, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I lay there, shaking, straining to hear any sound of footsteps following me. Nothing came. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows. I went downstairs cautiously, my throat dry, desperately needing water. The kitchen was empty, everything exactly as it had been the day before, except on the counter was a single teacup filled with something dark that steamed gently in the morning light. Next to it was a note, in that same perfect handwriting. "You weren't supposed to look." I spent the morning in a daze, the teacup on the counter a constant reminder that this wasn't just my imagination running wild. I'd poured its contents down the drain, watching the liquid leave an iridescent film that slowly crawled back up the drainpipe before disappearing. My phone still showed no signal, but the time kept changing in strange ways, sometimes jumping forward hours, sometimes backward, sometimes displaying impossible numbers like 2561. I'd given up on it as a reliable way to track time. The sun moved across the sky too quickly, or maybe my perception of time was warped by fear and lack of sleep. Either way, evening approached far sooner than it should have. I needed to get supplies, food, water, maybe a weapon. But Rule 4 echoed in my mind, don't go outside after dark. And darkness was coming fast. I decided to do one last check of the house before sunset, looking for anything I might have missed that could help me understand what was happening. That's when I made my fatal mistake. I went upstairs. She was there, standing at the end of the hallway, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, with pigtails that hung at slightly different lengths. She clutched a teddy bear that looked wrong somehow, its proportions off, its button eyes reflecting light that didn't exist. But it was her eyes that froze me in place, dark, bottomless pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. Rule 6 kicked in through my panic. If you walk up the stairs and see a little girl holding a teddy bear, go into the first door on your left, grab a toy from the box, place it in front of the girl, then go downstairs for 15 minutes. It will be safe afterward. The first door on the left. I turned slowly, keeping the girl in my peripheral vision. The door was there, though I could have sworn this hallway had been differently arranged before. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. The room beyond was small, barely larger than a closet, and completely empty, except for a cardboard box in the center. The box looked old, water-stained and soft at the corners. Inside were toys, dozens of them, all looking decades old and slightly wrong. A doll with too many fingers, A toy car with windows that seemed to show actual darkness inside. A wooden train that felt warm to the touch, like it had a fever. I grabbed the first thing my hand touched, a small boat made of what felt like bone rather than wood. Rule 6 hadn't specified what kind of toy to use, and I wasn't about to stay long enough to be picky. The girl hadn't moved when I came out, but her head had turned to follow me, her neck bent at an impossible angle. I placed the bone boat at her feet, trying not to look directly at her face, then backed away toward the stairs. "Run, run, run!" my instinct screamed, but I forced myself to walk down the stairs into the living room. I collapsed onto the couch, my heart hammering in my chest, and looked at my watch. 15 minutes. I just had to wait 15 minutes. The seconds crawled by. The house had gone completely silent. No creaks, no waves, not even the hum of the refrigerator, just the sound of my own breathing and the tick, tick, tick of my watch, which seemed to be slowing down. 14 minutes. The silence grew heavier, pressing against my eardrums. 13 minutes. Was that humming coming from upstairs? Oh, when minutes? The light in the room seemed to be dimming, though the sun shouldn't have set yet. 10 minutes. The humming had definitely gotten louder and now had a melody, a twisted version of a lullaby I almost recognized. 8 minutes. The temperature was dropping. I could see my breath. 5 minutes. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of something dragging across the floor upstairs. 3 minutes. Footsteps, small, light footsteps, coming down the stairs. 2 minutes. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I kept my eyes fixed on my watch. 1 minute. Something was breathing behind me. Time up. I looked up from my watch. She was still there. Rule 6. If the girl doesn't leave, run. I bolted for the front door, my fingers fumbling with the locks. Behind me, the girl made a sound. Not a child's laugh, but something older. Something that sounded like metal scraping against bone. The door finally opened, and I burst out onto the porch, only to realize with horror that the sun had already gone down. I burst out onto the porch, only to realize with horror that the sun had already gone down. The darkness outside was absolute, suffocating, and I knew in that moment that I had made a terrible mistake. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, as I heard a faint rustling from behind me. Slowly, I turned, dreading what I might see. There, in the doorway, the girl stood, her eyes now glowing with an otherworldly light. The teddy bear she clutched seemed to move of its own accord, its limbs twitching and contorting. A primal fear gripped me, and I knew I had to get away to find safety, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. I stumbled backward, my hands searching frantically for the door handle, but it had vanished, as if the house had sealed itself against me. The girl took a step forward, her movements fluid and unnatural. I could hear the sound of her bones cracking, shifting, as she drew closer. The air grew thick and heavy, and I struggled to breathe, my lungs burning. In a last-ditch effort, I turned and ran, blindly, into the oppressive darkness. I could hear the girl's laughter, a cacophony of twisted, warped sounds, echoing all around me. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift and undulate, as if the very earth was alive and intent on swallowing me whole. Time lost all meaning as I ran, my muscles burning, my lungs on fire. I stumbled and fell, the sharp rocks and vegetation tearing at my skin, but I refused to give in to the encroaching darkness. I had to keep moving, had to find a way out, even if it meant my own destruction. But the house, the girl, the darkness, they were all relentless, closing in around me, suffocating me, until I could no longer tell where I ended and the nightmare began. And in that final, agonizing moment, as the darkness consumed me, I realized that I had never truly been on vacation at all. I had been trapped, from the very beginning, in a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. In July 2019, my 3 best friends and I made plans for a vacation to Barcelona. We were all 18 at the time, just finishing our first year of college and excited for our first big trip together. The 4 of us, all girls, had been talking about this trip for months, daydreaming about exploring the city, visiting famous sites, and enjoying the local food. Even though we had plenty of time to get everything ready, we ended up waiting until the last minute to book our flights and Airbnb. We spent days scrolling through different websites, checking out dozens of options, but most were either too expensive or too far from the city center. It felt like every good spot was booked and everything left was way out of our budget. Finally, one of my friends found a nice studio apartment near the Ramblas, a busy tourist area full of shops and restaurants. The studio was on a narrow street that crossed the main Rambla, so it wasn't too crowded. We had to walk about 500 meters to reach the quieter, more run-down end of the street where the apartment was located. But we didn't mind. The first 3 nights were great, as we had some male friends in Barcelona who we met up with, which was a lot of fun. However, the 4th night was really creepy. We got home around 4 a.m. and chatted with my friends for another hour before finally falling asleep. Around 7:30 a.m., my friend who was sleeping with me in the living room woke up because she felt something tickling her ankle. She opened her eyes and saw a figure crouching at the end of the bed, searching for something under the bed. The room was dim, and she wasn't sure if she was having sleep paralysis, but the fear made her sit up in bed and shout. I woke up and saw the guy too. He got scared, quickly stood up, stared at us with wide eyes, and then tiptoed away, walking right past the bed where my other friends were sound asleep. We were in shock and stayed awake for a long time, whispering about what had just happened and trying to make sense of it. We never figured out how the guy got into our apartment, as we hadn't locked the front door that night, thinking we were safe. My name is Natalia, but people call me Tally. I'm a 20-year-old language student from Leicester, and right now I'm spending a year abroad in Bordeaux in the south of France. I haven't made a lot of friends here because I'm not much of a party person, like my big sister, but the few friends I do have are very important to me. A couple of weeks ago, we went on a trip around the south to my friend Clement's hometown, Joan. There are many small, beautiful villages in the countryside, surrounded by green hills and vineyards. The villages are quiet and peaceful, since tourists don't usually visit this area, and the locals are sometimes surprised to see someone from another country. Not far from Joan, there is a slightly bigger village called Onling. It's another beautiful and quiet part of the country that not many people know about except the locals. The village has lovely old buildings, and there's even a famous Michelin star restaurant there, so we decided to go to the restaurant for my boyfriend Brad's 23rd birthday. It was a special night because it was also almost our second anniversary. We booked a table for 4 at the restaurant. Me, Brad, Clement, and his girlfriend Jeanette. We enjoyed a nice meal and then sat outside drinking wine like true French people. After that, we took a late-night walk through the town and admired the cute little frog statues around the area. When we got too tired, we decided to head back to our Airbnb to rest for the night before going to our next destination. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of something scratching by the door or the window. I wondered if it could have been a dog or maybe another small animal like a cat. The sounds went away almost as quickly as they started, and I soon fell back asleep. Not long after, I woke up again, but this time it was because Brad had gotten up to use the bathroom. As I lay back down on the pillow and closed my eyes, trying to relax, a sudden feeling of fear washed over me. I glanced at the window, which should have been closed with the shutters, but since Brad wasn't used to living there, he forgot to lock it. My heart raced as I listened closely, hoping to hear nothing unusual, but I could see a hand outside slowly pulling the window open. The hand was holding something that looked shiny, and I heard a sound like an old-fashioned camera shutter closing over and over. I knew exactly what it was because I remembered that sound from my grandfather taking family photos years ago. I yelled out to Brad, and the person at the window quickly began to climb down. In the moonlight, I saw a clear glimpse of a very unique ring on their left hand. It looked wooden and had a special marking on one side. Neither Brad nor I slept at all the rest of the night. We were too frightened to close our eyes, listening for any strange sounds and feeling anxious every time the wind rustled outside. As soon as the sun came up, we checked out of the room as early as we could. We still don't know who tried to break in, but the creepiest part for me is that someone might have a photo of me lying in bed, and I have no idea who has it. In early spring 2016, when I had just turned 24, my friend and I arrived at our usual camping spot, Black Canyon Rim Campgrounds near Pagosa Springs. The campground was surrounded by tall pine trees with a wide view of the mountains in the distance. We could hear birds singing, and the fresh scent of pine filled the air. We usually came here 2 or 3 times a year to escape the noise of the city. The views were always amazing, and the drive was only a couple of hours away, making it a perfect weekend getaway. This area was mostly quiet and away from people, and there was a small, privately owned store a few miles away and in a small town about 20 miles before that. The entrance to the campground was on a dirt road right off the highway. A sign at the start of the road gave information about local wildlife, fire warnings, and other news for campers. We arrived around 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, which was late for us, as we usually tried to get there by noon at the latest. This trip was last minute, and we both had work coming up on the weekend, so we just decided to go for it. The sun was setting quickly, and we still hadn't chosen a spot to camp. There were only 2 other groups, both families, parked near the entrance, just a few hundred yards from the highway, but we just wanted to get away from people for a while. We drove down the dirt road, past our usual spot, and finally found the perfect place. A small clearing on the edge of a hill. From there, we could see the entire valley, and the sunset was really beautiful. We decided to start a campfire and skip setting up a tent this time. I would sleep in the back seat and my friend would take the front passenger seat. The next day was pretty calm. We just relaxed and took it easy. However, I had a weird feeling all day, like someone was watching us. I heard leaves crunching nearby every few hours, but I thought it was just the local animals moving around. My friend didn't notice anything unusual, so I tried not to think about it too much. As night came, the strange feeling still hadn't gone away. My friend fell asleep in the front passenger seat while I tried to relax in the back. I leaned against the side window behind the passenger seat with my legs stretched out to the back door. The window across from me was rolled down a little and a cold breeze came in. I had been on my phone scrolling through random things when I heard a noise outside. I heard some leaves crunching a few steps away from the car, so I whispered to my friend, but she was already asleep. I put my phone down and listened carefully for a minute or two, but heard nothing. It must have been a small animal curious about our camp. About 10 minutes later, I heard it again. I lowered my phone, and my eyes took a moment to adjust from the light of the screen to the darkness of the woods. When I turned the phone away from me, the backlight lit up the window by my feet. That's when I saw it. 2 dirty, scabbed hands were holding on to the window, with the fingers reaching into the car. At every few seconds, I could see breath making the glass foggy. All I could see were the reflections of those empty black eyes. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. It felt like forever as I stared at this thing. The hands slowly let go of the window and moved back into the darkness. The fog on the glass cleared, and I heard the dreaded crunch, 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 slowly fading into the distance. I pounded on my friend's seat, waking her up. I quickly unlatched the back door, kicked it open with a loud thud, and scanned the dark woods around us. The air was cold and still, and the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves. I hurried to grab any important camping supplies we had left outside and stuffed everything into the back seat and trunk, glancing over my shoulder now and then to listen for those footsteps. As we were leaving, I saw 2 handprints pressed against the window and quickly wiped them away. We reached the highway and drove about 20 miles until we got to a Denny's. My friend asked us to stop there to eat and talk about everything. I still feel embarrassed about how shocked I was at that moment. Was it another camper playing tricks on us? A person living in the abandoned cabin down the dirt road? Or maybe something supernatural lurking in the forest, watching lonely campers as they drift off to sleep. We continued to camp there in the following years, but always stayed close to the highway. A few months ago, I moved out from my house for work reasons. Even though I had to wait a couple of months before moving into my next place, I decided to stay at my close friend Amy's holiday family house. It's empty most of the time and is in the village where I grew up, in the countryside. I've known this family and their house well since I was a small child. The house is rather large, with 2 floors and 5 bedrooms, and it's in a quiet, even remote part of the village, surrounded by forests and other empty holiday houses. I knew this could feel scary since I'm a 27-year-old female living alone, but I don't like letting fear hold me back. Before moving in, I planned to check all the doors and windows carefully. After that, I would look through every room, check under every bed, and open all the wardrobes. This way, I could be sure the house was completely empty, and I would keep it that way by always locking the doors carefully. I also knew there were no spare keys, so if I got somehow scared at night, I could remind myself it was just in my head. My mother came with me to help check everything since she lives nearby. We ran into a problem early on while checking the doors and windows. 2 glass doors from the patio weren't working right, and anyone could easily slide them open. These doors were set up so that one faced the garden and the other connected the patio to the rest of the house. This meant someone could get into the patio from outside and then enter the house. I called my friend Amy and we agreed that I should get a locksmith. Amy's family isn't doing great financially right now, so depending on the cost, we'd either fix only the door to the garden or both doors. Luckily, the price was reasonable, so the locksmith, a lady, was able to change both locks. The patio was now perfectly secure. However, the locksmith said the glass door leading to the garden was weak, and someone could easily open it if they really wanted to. But since the glass door between the patio and the rest of the house was safe, I didn't worry about that. People could enjoy themselves in the patio as long as I felt safe inside my house. The first few days were a little scary, but since I was careful with the doors and the area around the house was so peaceful and nice, I quickly loved living there. I enjoyed warming up by the fireplace, eating good food, and breathing fresh air. I felt very free and happy. My daughter and I just returned from a trip to Virginia, where we had booked an Airbnb for 6 nights, but we ended up leaving after the 3rd night. Though the host was friendly and showed warm Southern hospitality, something felt off right from the start. The door code was a long string of 7 numbers, which she had memorized, but it was really hard for me to remember. After we arrived and began unloading our bags, I ended up locking us out, so I had to walk over to the host's house to ask for the code again. The host welcomed us in, but things quickly became strange. She asked if we wanted something to drink, but then began asking my daughter a lot of random questions. At one point, she even told me to stay silent, saying she only wanted my 8-year-old to answer. That gave me an uneasy feeling, as though something was wrong. When we were leaving, the host advised us to close the curtains in the house, even though she said it was a safe place. The way she said it made me feel like she was hiding something. The property itself was huge and entirely private, surrounded by open fields, trees, and not a single neighbor in sight. On the first night, I kept hearing what sounded like a big bug with a hard shell hitting the mini-split unit in the bedroom repeatedly. Exhausted from traveling for 18 hours, I didn't pay much attention to it. But the second night was different. As we lay in bed, the bathroom connected to our room on the 2nd floor began making a strange metallic tinkering sound. My daughter slept through it, but I kept feeling more anxious and uneasy. I tried to convince myself I was just nervous from the trip. Over the next 2 days, odd things continued. The fan I had left on was turned off every time we returned, and there was a small extendable mirror in the bathroom, the only mirror, that could tilt up and down. Each time I returned, it was tilted down to a child's level. Initially, I thought my daughter was adjusting it, so I'd just fix it. But on the last day, I tilted it back up, went downstairs to check on her while she was coloring, and then went back up. To my shock, the mirror was tilted down again. By the third night, all the strange occurrences in the house became too much for me. I felt like we were being watched. That evening, my daughter went to take a shower and told me, "I'm closing the bathroom door so the lightning bugs can't watch me." She is very outgoing and usually wants me nearby, and she never likes the bathroom door shut when she showers. This showed me that she was feeling uneasy too, even if she couldn't explain it. Later that night, after my daughter had fallen asleep, I began experiencing severe panic attacks, which is unusual for me. Then, the noises in the bathroom started again, louder and faster this time. I heard what sounded like someone moving things on the bathroom counter and possibly even dropping a glass. Next, the closet door across from the bed opened, hitting my suitcases that were in the way. These sounds continued for hours, and everything in me screamed to get out and protect my daughter. The next morning, I went into the bathroom and saw muddy footprints coming out of the shower. I tried to rationalize it, but it made no sense. My daughter hadn't played in any mud, and even if she had, there would have been muddy footprints leading from the front door where we took off our shoes. Panic set in as I packed our bags, feeling an overwhelming urge to leave immediately. After we left, the host messaged me, offering an extra night for free since we hadn't returned for 2 nights. I didn't reply. It took me several days to shake off the fear from that experience, and my daughter and I still feel unsettled thinking about it. I want to start by saying I don't fully believe in ghosts. However, what I experienced in the house still defies explanation, and it lasted about 2 weeks until we had someone cleanse the place. From 2019 to 2021, I was stationed at Aviano Air Base in northern Italy with the United States Air Force. While I was there, I moved into a house with a close friend from tech school and his wife. Living there changed my beliefs about the supernatural. I went from being a complete skeptic to almost being sure ghosts might be real. During the first week, nothing strange happened, but after that, I started having intense nightmares every night, each one leaving me scared and uneasy, though I can't remember the details. Almost every time I woke up, I experienced sleep paralysis, unable to move, as a quiet whooshing sound grew louder and louder until it was almost unbearably loud. Now, one night I woke up in a cold sweat, confused and terrified. At the foot of my bed, I saw a dark figure rising up, reaching towards me. Then, suddenly, it started lifting my legs off the bed. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed, held in this nightmare-like state as the figure loomed closer. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, it disappeared and I could finally move again. I brushed it off as a vivid nightmare, but the events only grew more intense. My friend and his wife started experiencing the same sleep paralysis, each with similar visions of dark figures looming over them. They described feeling intense pressure on their chests and hearing whispers in their ears, similar to what I'd heard. One day, we had a local friend who was familiar with these experiences come to our house to perform a cleansing. After that, the strange occurrences stopped. We lived there for another year without any incidents, but the memory of those 2 weeks haunted us long after. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to book an Airbnb to celebrate Christmas. We found a charming house at a great price in a quiet rural area. What we didn't know was that it was located right across from an old graveyard, which made us feel a bit uneasy. After a long drive, we arrived, unpacked our bags, and took a moment to relax. The house was lovely, with wooden floors and large windows that let in plenty of light. After settling in, we decided to explore the area. There were only a few houses down the road, and most of the land around us was open fields with tall, dry grass. When we spotted the graveyard, we decided not to venture in. 2 days later, after dinner, we were relaxing in the kitchen when one of my friends suggested we explore the graveyard since we hadn't gone inside. We discussed it for a while, and 2 of my friends decided to stay at the house, leaving 3 of us to go exploring. We grabbed a flashlight, put on our jackets, and crossed the street. As we walked through the graveyard, we could hear the crunch of dry leaves under our feet. We took turns reading the names on the gravestones. My friend with the flashlight went ahead, leaving me and another friend in darkness. The girl with me started to panic, so she ran toward the friend with the flashlight. In her rush, she tripped over a grave, stumbled and tripped over the same tombstone again, landing even harder. She laughed nervously, clearly shaken, but thankfully she was fine. Later that night, after returning to the house, we went to bed. I was sharing a bed with the girl who had tripped. Around 2 a.m., she suddenly shook me awake, looking terrified. She whispered that she had heard knocking on the window next to our bed. We stayed silent, listening, but only heard the wind outside. I lay back down, but then I heard a faint knock on the wall. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to freeze us with fear. We agreed that if we heard it again, we would wake up our friends. Just when we thought it was over, we heard 2 sharp knocks on the bed frame right beside us. Heart pounding, we jumped out of bed and woke our friends. They listened to our story, but didn't believe anything unusual had happened. To this day, we still don't know what caused those knocks, but we get chills just thinking about it.